Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. If you've been following us for a while now, you know that I've been having conversations with a whole bunch of really interesting people about emerging problems in AI and in data science. Those things have included AI existential risk, the AI alignment problem, fairness, bias, and ethics in AI, all really important open problems in this space. But one area that we haven't looked at quite as much is the impact that data science has had in the developing world and where that might be going. Now, that's a gap that I really want to fill because, as concerned as I am about the legitimate risks that I think advanced AI systems will pose to us in the future, it's also important not to lose sight of the fact that AI delivers value today. And if there are ways for us to deliver that value to people who otherwise wouldn't have access to it, I think they're worth exploring. And that brings us to today's conversation with Dr. Yan Li. Now, Yan's a professor at Claremont Graduate University, but she's also the co-founder of Techies Without Borders, which is a really interesting nonprofit that's focused on delivering value to resource-scarce communities in the developing world through IT, basically helping them to overcome challenges in healthcare, human rights, and education using technology. As you'll see, solving that problem actually requires an awful lot of analytics savvy because it's so open-ended. It's not always clear what number needs to go up in order for Techies Without Borders to accomplish their goals. So we'll be talking about how to define good metrics for this kind of problem space, and we'll also be discussing the unique and kind of surprising challenges that come up when you're building tech for the developing world. So with that said, I'll step out of the way and let you listen to the conversation. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. All right. Well, Yan, thanks so much for joining me for the podcast.
Okay, thank you.
I'm really interested to talk to you because we've been focusing most of our conversation so far on questions that have to do with like the North American kind of Western developed country market. We've been talking about things like OpenAI. We've been talking about things like general intelligence, AI alignment, all that stuff. But there is an untold story here, I think, that we need to explore more, and that's this question of AI and data science and just software infrastructure in the developing world as well, and how that's affecting things. You've obviously focused a lot of your time on that problem, and I'd love to hear from you. Like, what is the backstory to Techies Without Borders, and how did you end up settling on that problem class?
Okay, so this goes back. I want to, first of all, my background is in information systems and technology. So actually, I was trained, in the problem space. And then in our field, there's a area called ICT 4D, which is Information Communication Technology for Development. So the belief is ICT, the technology, it can help human development. So through using technology help human development. So many, even when I was in my PhD program, we have done building computers for Haiti, with low resource computers. And we have a group of techies focused on those problems. We have built mobile applications for humans to track their health in rural areas in India. So through that process, we originally didn't incorporate the call Techies Without Borders. We just call us and we do the work. Then it comes in 2016, and we started a project that was suggested by a doctor, an emergency medicine doctor, who saw one of our solutions, which is, we call that computers on a stick. We developed a computer on a thumb drive that can give low resource countries kids to learn how to use computers.
And sorry, is this like an operating system, or is the actual hard drive or?
Yeah, it's a USB that is encapsulate that as a computer. So you have a USB drive that serves as almost as a personalized computer. So because in this, for example, in Haiti where we work, right? So they don't have the computer resources. So the kids won't have laptops or tablets as we would do here in the Western world, right? So most of when we went there in, I think 2000, the first time we went there in 2000, maybe 10, majority, even people with like in the 14, 15 have never seen a computer before. So we donated very old computers to them, but they don't have their personalized space. So we provide a thumb drive like the personalized computers. When you plug in, it has a self-operational system built on a Linux, like a Linux system, but it has interfaces. And also because all the areas, they don't have internet, period. So they will not be able to afford internet. And so what we did is within the computer on the stick, we actually have a self-contained browser that includes all the captures of the World Wide Web. So they can search, they can do. Then there's a lot of educational content there. Like
Wow.
Khan Academy, right? So most of our kids can go to Khan Academy from a web browser, but we can't. So we kind of encapsulated that in the USB. So that's called computer on a stick. We developed it in really rural areas in Haiti. So I went there, I saw it, I knew what real rural was. And so I think at the time, I think the most satisfaction I can is really see our work has impact is you can see, we have pictures how the kids' eyes popped because
Mm.
it's a word they have never seen before, right? So the mouse delicacy that I can see, like they were smiling to see the mouse on the screen anyhow. So that's our initial work. Then the work the doctor saw, then she sees a common problem in, again, very rural developing countries is a lack of continuing medical education for doctors. The doctors get training, then they were out. Once they were out, they were overwhelmed. They didn't have resources. They didn't have, time to go for medical conferences. They won't have access to continuing medical education content, especially in the areas, our initial site at Nepal, because she volunteered there. Nepal is very mountainous. So in a lot of areas, you really don't have regular internet access. Electricity sometimes comes and goes, right? So she's really keen. She does this training for the doctors, and she's really keen saying, can we use similar concepts like computer on the stick to
Mm.
help doctors to do the similar education for which is post-graduation and education. So when we started our CMES project of continuing medical education on stick. So originally it's concept like similar like computers on a stick. Very same idea. So we designed application. Then through and first deployed in Nepal in 2016. Then through the process, we got feedback from the doctors that they said, oh, we love this solution, but we still have to plug the thumb drive in a computer to be able to view the content. So by the way, our CMES on the thumb drives can, when you don't have internet, you still have all the content up to date, monthly updated, very quality CME content, usually in a PDF or in the podcast ways. But then if they don't have internet, you still have the content. Whenever they go to an area has internet access, they can automatically sync all the new content to the thumb drive. So, but they said, when I'm at the bedside or in my clinic, I really very busy. I won't have time to go to a computer, plug in, search a topic,
Mm.
how can I treat a patient? So is it possible we can offer something like, because by the way, in developing countries, although computer is not that, nowadays, I think mobile technology really enabled many of the technology empowerment because many people may not have a laptop, portable computer, but almost everyone has smartphones, not high end like Apple, but lower end smartphones. And they may not be able to afford a house internet, but because the mobile technology goes to the internet is much easier for them. Anyhow, so to that point, they would like to be able to search the content on the bedside. So we start to develop another solution we call CMES Pi, which is a portable Raspberry Pi computer, have our CMES operational system we designed. And then similarly, if the Pi can sit there, then if there's internet, automatic ping will pull the new content. If there's no internet, it still can sit there. And within the Pi's Wi-Fi range, it switches maybe 3 or 4, rooms, clinics, and you can have a mobile application. You can just access to the content, do the search, and listen to the podcast. So that's the second solution. So by middle of the 2016 and the end of 2016, we grew quite big, and we started to have a lot of participants. And then we realized, originally we started with I applied internal grants through CGU, so my university, and then we got Microsoft Azure give us backend. Our backend is still built on Azure, a backend grant for like $30,000. but then but we still need to purchase, some drives and pies because we offer everything for free. Then we realize, yeah, in order for it to sustain, we need to figure out the funding, continuous funding. To do continuous funding, the best way is going through a nonprofit organization. So that's why we decided. We have the Techies Without Borders website for a long time, but we went through the formal process and made it a nonprofit organization. So that's the backstory of it.
One of the things that story really illustrates for me is just how important innovation is when it comes to nonprofit work overseas. I think it's so easy to miss that because sometimes you get the feeling that an awful lot of charitable giving is done with the mentality that we're going to throw money at the problem. We're going to throw food. We're going to throw whatever, water at the problem. And there are areas, of course, where that is appropriate. But when you start to describe how life works in Haiti, in Nepal, and the basic things that we assume must be available for everybody. Everybody must be banked. Everybody must have access to the internet and so on and so forth. You start to realize how little empathy it's possible for us to really have for people in those situations. I guess one question I'd have in the space of all those different discoveries that you've made about, the different things that are or are not available, depending on geography, depending on, local population wealth and all that. What are some of the most surprising things you've learned? Like that, people in location X, for example, can't do thing Y because of constraint Z that people in the West might not have thought of.
Yes. So exactly. So first of all, one of the constraints I think we all know, right? I already described earlier. Lack of internet access or regular internet access, we said. I also mentioned the hardware issues, like portable laptops, probably not always an option. But in our context, because we work with many doctors, so many of them actually more privileged probably would have access to a computer, right? So even with that, like on one of the clinics we actually went to in our deployment is called Kunde Hospitals. So Kunde Hospital serves Himalayas mountains, like near the Himalaya Mountain Everest base camp. So this is very mountainous. They serve about 8,000 population, but it's middle of. We need to flew to a location. Then it took us 3 days hike to go there. There's no other way you can get to that clinic. 3 days hike and 2 days hike down to install our Pi there. So when you go there, you realize, right? So they do have some internet, but it comes and goes. During our hike there was 2 days. We bought a mobile phone with internet access, but then one of the mobile towers went down. 2 days, you have no communication with outside world. No cell phone signal, even we have it, right? That means the whole population in that area is cut out from the outside world. Only very expensive, probably satellite images can be available for emergency situations. So imagine the doctor works in that environment, because doctor, that's in a village called Kunde. And before this clinic was established in 1976, before 1976, all the population there have no medical care. So I've heard the backstories. People died, just say they died. They didn't know, if you fall from the mountains, broke your leg, you are dying. It's no way, right? So although it's a small clinic, but it's very impactful. However, imagine doctors who work there, they're very isolated. And most of them don't live in the villages. So I talked to the doctor who works there. So the doctor probably need to hike a few days, then we'll stay in the clinic in a month and go home for a few days and come back, right? Then if you don't have regular internet access, you don't have, regular talk with your peers. So you're very isolated and you don't update your knowledge at all. So when we went there, we installed the Pi. Then it's really to us, how to say that, you can see the excitement in the doctor who works there. We have pictures how she used her phone to look at the content, and so it's one of our most active Pis currently available. So, but then quickly, this is one of the situations in the sense that, but quickly in that setup, we realized that's one of the things we realized that in these rural areas, our Pi was designed. You need some initial configuration to go in. So you need to configure certain networks because we want Pi to be updatable, so it need to be connected to the network. So we did original setting, you have to connect networks, then we quickly realized in our initial deployment, almost all in those areas, they really don't have an IT department in the
Right.
clinic, hospitals. There's no people really understand technology, right? So it's infeasible for us to travel to every location to do the installation, right? So we try to do remote calls and to do that. It's just not feasible. So actually that was one of the development challenges. So how do you develop solutions that, quite technical, but you don't have IT support? So the key thing is you just to try to make your solution try to be foolproof. So we really spend a lot of time in the development to later we call our CMS pie called pie on the fly. So in a sense that we can just mail a pie to you, you can plug in and play. Many of the design challenges on the back end, but now you don't need to IT help to do the back end, how to say that configuration and setup, right? So yeah, the second one challenge we call the cost is always a challenge, right? If you want to do scalable, you want low cost maintenance. That's why we picked the Pi, because the
Right.
hand Pi, including a USB, now we upgrade to 128 gigs by USB. It probably only costs us like $60 to $70, much cheaper than a regular computer. And it's very small, power consumption is low, so that's
Mm-hmm.
why we settled on the Pi as a computer rather than give you a server station. That's also the consideration.
I just find that so fascinating that there's a sense in which you're almost rediscovering the value of the supply chain. You're peeling back the layers of the onion going like, okay, can you do this? Oh no, why? Oh, because you're missing this. Okay, well, what if we do that? Oh, you still can't do this? Okay, then we need to do this. It's almost this outside in view of like how economies work that you're getting just because of the areas that you're targeting. I feel like this is not a thing that most people would imagine goes into this sort of work, but understanding economies, understanding supply chains, that must be a big part of this, right?
Yes, it is. It is. And yes, it is. And also understand, the whole infrastructure, how it works, right? So we almost for every country we start, we're never going to just fly in, find a clinic, say, do you trust our solution? We usually find their authorities.
Right.
And like in Nepal, when we flew in, even when we first deployed, actually we started it, actually talk with the health administrators, right? So then we have their connections. We started with with government connections. They would get us connected to certain nonprofit
Mm.
hospitals, and then we started to grow. So similarly, currently our TWB this year we focus on Africa. So we really connected with called FEM, Africa Federation of Emergency Medicine, so which is the whole Africa. Then we really spend our time to build a relationship with them, demonstrate our solutions, and try to show them the values. And now they're on board. So then they help us to promote it. Then it's much easier. So you are right to the point. In the development in we call this research area, we all agree, right? And outsiders will never be just like you fly in from Western world, and then you will have to leave, right? So
Yeah.
in the end, if you don't have those understanding of local contextualization, your project will not be sustainable.
Well, actually, this brings us to another area that I think is really important here and easy to miss, and that's the idea of trust. So we have this idea, even in the West, when we let's say when Google or Facebook comes out with a new algorithm, everyone's ears sort of perk up. We sort of wonder, okay, like what biases might have played into this? What are the things that this company might want that I might not want? Things like that. I imagine that there's something similar that might occur, especially if you're going to a part of the world where people are just less comfortable with the idea of algorithms to begin with, of living by the predictions of these algorithms, making decisions based on their output. What's the trust story here? Like, do you find that specific techniques tend to work especially well in terms of trust building, in terms of getting people on board with your approach?
So this goes back earlier. Yeah, it's a very good question. So although our TWB work, most of it currently in CME rather than less, you are providing an algorithms recommendations, right? But we
Yeah, more
all,
about infrastructure.
yeah, exactly, about infrastructure, about providing content. But the key thing is you're right to point. How do you build that trust? So I think earlier we said I want to sit back a little bit, but I think it's a great question to the general, even the data science community, right? So I really think there's really not much differences in really how to approach to the trust for people to be able to trust a machine learning algorithm recommendations versus their own judgment.
Yeah.
It is being asked. We have, when we worked with the developing agencies, nonprofit organizations across the world, and we have a focus group called AI for developing world. And the top question is, how do you let people to trust your machine is, better than my own instinct, right? So I'm not sure, you probably must have heard IBM Watson failure story at MD Anderson. Do you know that story?
I may have heard it before, but please go ahead and share it. It'd be.
So I'm not sure if all your audience would have heard about this. I think it was attracted much of the attention in probably maybe Watson launched in probably early 2013.
Yeah.
At the time, it attracted a lot of media attention because it's called cognitive computing, AI in medicine, so it says the medias think that finally the AI can, replace human expert to better treat and cancer, right? So media give a lot of positive coverages, and I think by 2016, it has admitted it's a failure. Or the audit happens that it's really never operationalized, and the doctors won't trust anything from the algorithm recommendations,
And I believe it was tens of millions of dollars later, right? It was something like that, or hundreds.
Yeah, I think 68 million, or maybe I could be wrong. It being spent, but there's no measurable outcomes. No one knew if even Watson was, really made any impact or not. And also the Watson, was trained on certain data set, but the EHR system was not impacted. So there's certain of the data couldn't even get in. So there's a lot of, then people reflect upon from the Watson, right? So at the time, we all know, I think the key thing is the Watson doesn't match, the way or your whatever your machine and come in, try to replace human, but it doesn't match how human works. So the algorithm really, has its own way, but doesn't match how doctors works, right? So especially, Watson is a black box. But for a doctor per se, they have years of experience and they were trained, right? If your result is not understandable by the doctors, they're not going to be accepted. Or you don't explain why you arrived certain decisions, they will not trust it. So in a sense, that's why I always believe, in current stages, especially AI and medicine, and there's a lot of talk also in like AI in, AI in medicine is a lot of talk in NIH now and FDA say, if you embedded an AI algorithm in a machine, in a product, how do you going to trust it, or how you going to, accept the result, how you going to prove it, right? So I still think currently AI in medicine should be better positioned as clinical decision support. So it is still very powerful because you do have a much larger 4C data, for example, Watson being stored with, that not a single human doctor would possibly know.
Yeah.
Right. So AR does have that, ability to be able to search through large amount of material, and then they could provide a recommendation. So rather than saying, this is what you should do, I give you a few options. And why those are few options very possible because of A, B, and C, D. And when that happens, doctor would rather saying, I'm going to take your decision, but take your recommendation, rather you give me a few options and tell me why, then doctor evaluate, plus their own judgment, then come up with a solution.
So interpretability becomes even more important, basically, the moment you start to move into those areas, and I guess those parts of the world too, right? Because you need to sell the prediction basically as you're making it.
Yeah, you need to understand that. You're right to point. The key thing is I think exactly be able to output understandable recommendation. No matter what you recommend, give a justification, right? And also the key thing is not over and keep the human in the loop. So let human has final say, right? And then not over promising. I said, it's always be transparent, say what exactly it can do. People like to use fancy words, say, I can have this product going to be, the revolutionary, for example, in the Anson's case in cancer, treatment, cannot do that. It be realistic. But with that being said, I'm not saying, putting saying that, oh, it's no way AI can, replace humans, right? An algorithm can replace humans. It actually has happened in certain field, right? Image classification, it's all AI driven, because so I think definitely, I think two criteria has to be achieved first for you to be able to have that human trust or replace the human of the AI algorithms. The first thing I think many people, even I talk to in the real world. So just like we do our TWP projects, you don't say you do not end up with what your product try to do or what your machine learning algorithm performance is. You don't tell end user, oh, my algorithm have 99% of accuracy, but that doesn't mean anything because it doesn't mean impact, right? So if you go back to say, so not only, so it's the key thing is you need to have a very clear, defined, I already call that business success criteria. So how do you achieve your business objectives? So what is your machine learning algorithm or your recommendation try to achieve from a business objective point of view? You try to, for example, in MD Anderson's point of view, saying, my business objective is going to improving cancer treatment outcomes, right? So the key thing is, can you have a clear measure based on your recommendation to say, if I give you this recommendation, there's a ways I can demonstrate mine is better than another option. Then I can actually improving the patient outcomes. You have to be able to have that clear measure to demonstrate to end users. Say, look, I can demonstrate it works, right? Not in your approved model performance, proved in the business success criteria. So similarly, in our TWB's context, we cannot say our solution works. We can show you, right? Our Pi works perfectly. Our interface is beautiful, but that's not what we achieve. We want doctor to read it. So our success measure is not, our application works. Just like it's not a machine learning algorithm works that is accurate. But our outcome is doctor actually reads and doctors actually use the reading to help treat a patient.
Interesting.
Our success story related to a doctor tells us, oh, we use this article. We actually treat a patient. We have those stories is really impact, right? So I think that has to be established before you say, I'm going to use machine to help recommendations.
One of the things I find really interesting about this is it basically requires people who work in this space to just be better data analysts, better data scientists. These are not skills that that people can get away with not having, even if they work in a developed economy. Maybe they can count on the occasional person being able to connect dots in their own head because they have a little bit more technical background, but you're always better off if you can communicate better. You're always better off if you can build trust with people. It's just, this is that on steroids. You really need to be able to fill all those gaps in, make sure there's no room for sort of second guessing and doubt and suspicion. And the way it ties into your own metrics is fascinating too. I would love to ask you about that because this is something, I come from more of a startup background, and when you're in startups, you have a pretty clear metric. You have your sub metrics, but the main metric is always what's your revenue, what's your growth rate. You can optimize for that. When you're working on this kind of work, I guess metrics become a lot harder to specify. But if you had to name like one or two key numbers that TWB has to make go up, that Techies Without Borders, our job is to make this number go up. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on what those numbers are.
Okay, this is actually very interesting. So yes, you are correct. So our numbers, that goes back to think about, you think about matrix, right? Then also goes back to a lot of talks about how does data science related to it.
Yeah.
So metrics is measured. So in order for you to measure it, you have to capture the data to measure it, right? So for us, actually, it's actually one part we had that in mind from the beginning. When we design our applications, we actually design log files for all our products. So we do capture usage patterns. That's one of our metrics, right? So we kind of be able to see how active our users are engaged with our product. So within the log files, we capture usage patterns such as how many times people logged in, and what kind of files they viewed, opened, how long they viewed a file. And it's similar probably the usage pattern would have been captured from your social media, Facebook, even your Google search. So those are the log files we captured because we knew for us, one of the key metrics is, how many active users actually use the content. That is measurable, right? So it's very measurable. Then there's, I want to go back, you said metrics, clear defined. In our, the ultimate goal is to improve the patient care because we believe if doctor can improve their knowledges, they could improve their knowledge, they will eventually improve the patient care. But that's something intangible. So we just have to think about ways how we're going to move those intangible outcomes, right? So that's something actually for us, key metrics to track is to really looking at our participant physicians to see how many hours they logged in on the CME content.
Yep.
So we can, survey them to say, oh, how often do they do the CME training comparing before and after? Do we see an improvement, right? So of course, other metrics is, again, for us is we want to scale. So we want to keep track how many more countries, how many more participants we are, covering, and how many population that they are serving. So for example, this year we have an annual report for 2020. We said, we now cover 15 countries. We have total 3,600 practitioners are using, including doctors and nurses are using our application, and they are serving more than 2 million population. So that's a matrix we are looking at from a growth point of view. Then quality point of view is to see how they actually use this.
It's really interesting to note how much more challenging the data analytics job is, even like at the business level for Techies Without Borders, how much more challenging it is to do good data analytics when, as you say, the outcomes you're trying to make happen are these intangible things. So you almost need to like work backwards. You don't have a dollar figure to optimize. So immediately analytics becomes so much more, I want to say more interesting and more nuanced, which is its own cool thing. I mean, if you're a data analyst looking into nonprofit work, it seems like a cool area to find some interesting challenges. One question I do have on the practical side of like delivering these solutions. There's this common issue that arises in data science, actually in tech generally, where someone will bring in a consultant. They'll say, I have this data set and I want to solve this problem. And the consultant will come in, they'll say, okay, I see the data set. I'll build you a model or something like that. And there you go, they build the model. And everybody's happy for like about 2 weeks because they're like, we have this great model, everything's fantastic. We tell maybe our investors, have a press release, and it's great. And then all of a sudden people realize, oh no, that like we won't actually have access maybe to this feature in production, or we won't be able to use this in this way. And they realize, oh no, we need to iterate on this, but the consultant's gone now. And it's much harder to iterate on this. I imagine there's sort of analogous problems when you're going, especially into remote regions where you might not be back soon and you're delivering a solution. Like, how do you make sure that you're keeping up with those kind of ongoing requirements to fix things, to iterate, and so on?
Yeah, I think earlier I mentioned, right? So it's such a great how to say that question that is even common now in most of the organizations, or they try to develop their analytic capabilities, and so actually, and also it's a common feedback I had. So that I have to say, it's indeed a very common problem in the data science process. And I think to me, is the key thing is you have a formalized process and a very well documented, right? So I can use data science as an example. So how to say that I teach a data science practicum class, and for our data, I always find industry sponsors that students will do real world industry projects. So when I try to find industry sponsors, I said, what make us different? So what makes us different is first, our students all follow a formal process. That I'm not going to give you just an end model, a set of Python code that it can deploy. We never do that. We create a formal process from beginning, from the business understanding, what is exactly the business problem, we formally articulate it, work with the business sponsor, make sure they're buying. Then we say, this is how we're going to use data or model, analytics, data science to solve this problem. And so for your business problem to be solved, we define that success criteria, clearly say, what are we considering it's going to be a success outcome? What would be a successful model outcome? Then we go through, you said, right? We do a lot of data preparation, cleaning, feature selection, training, but we never end there. We never end a model. We create a deployment plan. So, but yeah, you had a very good question. I just have to say that, that's common mistake in ICT 4D work, the flying problems. Saying,
the flying problem.
Yeah, you don't provide a solution that others cannot embed it in their business process.
And what kinds of modifications do you have to make to solutions, let's say that get deployed in Nepal or that get deployed in Haiti? Like, what are some of the things that you have to do in order to make them maintainable?
Maintainable. Okay, so a couple of things. That's actually how to say that. The key thing is like using our CMES Pi as an example, right? So that's where also we picked up the Pi as an example. So for us, we do need to do some update. For example, currently we are adding a new functionality. Originally, we for the intellectual property perspective, we don't have download. Our content are encrypted. And so people can only view it on a mobile app. They cannot download any of the content. And so, but again, from the feedback, the user really saying, doctor said, oh, we are, very busy. We would like to be able to save some of the podcast on our phone so we can listen it while we're going home, rather we have to stay in the clinic, right? The podcast, sometimes it's 10, 20 minutes. And so we really worked on additional functionality for mobile download, like you would have checked out digital books or digital audio books from the library. So you do have that authentication, then you store it after 7 days, automatically delete. So that's a new functionality, but we have to make that functionality into our new systems, right? So we have already deployed. So the key thing is actually our maintainability is coming to that thumb drives. So the thumb drive is 64 GB, now it's 128 GB, not thumb drives, the SD card. So the key thing is we can either mail them a configured SD card, so they can just swap out with our new updated, systems, or we have a packaged installation, then they can buy a SD card if they have resources, then they can get it configured and plug in. Then we have a new updatable content.
So it really is like all the stuff that we take for granted, the automatic software updates that we get from our Android app. Yeah, you just don't have that. So you're mailing stuff. Fascinating.
Yeah, we're mailing stuff. Exactly. No, you don't get that. Yeah. So I'll give you another example. For example, we deployed an island of Fiji. So you have a beautiful island. Internet super expensive. Most people, even in hospitals, they will not have regular internet access. Doctors actually have better internet access at home, right? So for our Pi solution, they will never open network that you automatically ping the network for new content download. They will not do that. It's too expensive. They only open network whenever there's a necessary. So in our solution for the maintenance update, we actually have two SD cards there. So the doctor just swipe out. The doctor will just take one home and download the monthly content and swipe out.
Really does challenge all those assumptions that you might develop from living out here. You have a certain way of doing things, and it's like where those inefficiencies pop up, they're so specific. You have to really think like a startup founder really starting to solve a problem from scratch. It's fascinating. Actually, one thing I did want to ask too, because you're basically introducing not technical tooling, but you're introducing software, you're introducing communications infrastructure. There's a lot here that overlaps with privacy, especially when you get into medicine and healthcare. And I'm assuming these are a lot of countries that have more important things to deal with than privacy laws, frankly. I mean, if you're in certain parts of the world like Haiti, I suspect, I could be wrong, but I suspect the government doesn't, they're trying to keep people fed and keep the economy going. So is there a responsibility that you perceive to sort of self-regulate when it comes to privacy, to kind of export some kind of privacy standard and precedent set in that way?
Yeah, that's correct. I think privacy is a concern. We always, and this goes back, although they're, it's in different part of the world, although like you said, they're enforced whether that's enforced is a different option in different areas, right? So for us, TIWB, we're really considering, we call that computer ethics. So in the end of is very important. You just have the ethics to use the technology, right? And so we do, as you said, we do self-regulate in many different ways. First, as I earlier mentioned, we do collect log files, but we disclose that. All our participants knows the some drives and pies do have a log file. And what do we collect? We made it transparent, so they knew what we collect. We never collect anything without the user knew it, right? So secondly, we never collect any personal identifier information. That's period. So because we want to track different users, so we do have, in our Pi, we do have a login. So you do login, but login is very simple, no password. It's purely just, first name and last name initials. Even with that, we don't keep that username in our log files. That's just never going to be stored. And then also we really, for each country, when we start to deploy a solution, I told you, we always start working with, government agencies and non-profit organizations first in these domestic countries. And so because they work there, so we always make sure that, we're not doing something that's inappropriate for their cultural content, even right. So that's always happens. And also, we try to understand what is acceptable privacy laws and in each participant area. That always we come in, we will know that. And so also because I'm an academic, right? And also my co-founders, also several other co-founders and board members are academics. So we do inevitably, when we do this kind of project, we also do research. So sometimes right. we always, we do need to sometimes interact with our human subjects. So we always make sure we will attend an IRB, if you know that, especially medical research. It's called Institutional Review Board. So in any health-related medical research that is required, actually human subject research is, it's a board called IRB. It's a review board that is responsible to approve or exempt, your interaction with any, human subject. That is like group that's really formally designated to review and monitoring any research involving human subjects. And then they are concerning is the welfare, the rights, and the privacy of the human projects. So, we will never do something like talk to our participant without an RB approval first.
It's so interesting, the philosophical questions that come up and how that has to be managed. I wonder about the other side of that too, because I imagine if you go into certain areas, you might have, local or sort of state governments that have laws or views on privacy that are draconian or sort of like philosophically, ethically loaded, that you're then potentially forced to abide by. Like, have you encountered situations like that? Perhaps not, because I assume that people are just thankful for the service.
Not really. In this case, actually, not really. We haven't really encountered any of that kind of situations. Again, nature, because our solution, although our solution does has like human reading, but we don't do any, real interaction. Like, you do not have impact on the humans, right? So we're not asked you to participate in clinical trials and to, do other things. But I definitely knew that is a lot of in healthcare researchers, you try to do, for example, to do a lot of, I know like in like vaccine research, how do you ethically bind it to in certain countries just because they're low resources.
This is just a great, I think, a great glimpse at that aspect of the sort of global tech and data science problem. I think there, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's so easy to miss out on just how complex, how difficult these challenges are to resolve in parts of the world that most of us don't understand because we haven't been there. We don't know what the constraints are. It's great that there are, I was going to say companies, but nonprofits like yours that are focusing on this. If people want to learn more about Techies Without Borders, we'll provide a link. But is there anything? Anywhere that they should go, any like Twitter accounts they should follow, stuff like that?
Yes, Techies Without Borders. I will give you. We have a website. On the website, we do have. We are very. We learned that we are very active on social media right now. We have a LinkedIn account. We have a Facebook. We have a Twitter, and so you can follow us. And we always welcome, those techies who are really interested in contributing their knowledge to help the underserved populations around the world.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Yan. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.